Today on Market Journal, we're heading to Briggs Feed Yard to get a check on the cattle markets with Mike Briggs. Hear what he says a reduction in planted acres could mean for cattle feed. Plus, the Nebraska Legislature has wrapped up for the summer. Our own Bill Dodd will tell you which agricultural bills passed, which didn't, and what it means for you. And learn where you can find on-site demonstrations to manage weeds in corn, soybeans, and popcorn. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Good to see you and glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us. We're beginning the show with a conversation I had with Mike Briggs over at Briggs Feed Yard. We spoke on Monday about what he's seeing in the cattle markets. And with us officially into grilling season, there's lots to talk about. We've started by getting his thoughts on the latest Cattle on Feed report.
The nice thing about that report is it wasn't as bad as a lot of people anticipated, and that's why we got a little bit of a rally out of it. It didn't last very long, but the placements were 109%, I believe, but the market was expecting 116. But you still saw big placements, but you also saw really good marketings, and the on-feed wasn't quite as high. So even though it was a bearish report, it probably wasn't as bad as a lot of people expected. So I think that bodes well for us as we go forward.
And looking at slaughter numbers, looking like big numbers again for June and July this year?
Big number, well, really big numbers for May. We slaughtered more as many cattle as we did since 2009. So we're really moving a lot of meat and it's going through the system. I think that's really great. Now we'd like to see exports a little better, help pull the price up a little bit, but at least domestically, we're doing really well, especially when you throw in the fact that we've had some really poor weather. Haven't had a lot of good grilling weather yet.
With all the delays in planting, all the unplanted acres, what's that domino effect it's been having for cattle?
This is to the point of getting really serious. Guys need to be really careful about their feed needs. I personally would not buy any cattle right now without buying my feed needs, have those cattle covered. You know, I've seen pictures of where the only thing you can see is the arc of the pivot sticking out of the water. That's not getting planted ever. So you're gonna see a big reduction in planted acres. How big, we don't know yet, but at the time there's potential for a rather large amount to not get planted. You're really gonna knock this crop back, and that's gonna chase corn up, and I'm talking more than $1. So this thing could really be, it will have a big impact on your profit potential if you don't have that stuff locked in. I think people need to be really careful. And as late as it's getting, not only are you gonna lose acres, but the acres that do get planted are not gonna have the yield potential. So you're really hampering this crop, and you could see corn get upwards of $6 if this thing gets really bad. And I don't see any reason we're not gonna go to 5 here real short order. So you need to be careful as a cattle feeder, because that'll eat up your profit really fast.
Moving on to trade and the export restrictions with Japan, those have been lifted. Is that as big a deal as it sounds like?
It really isn't. Probably most of the meat that we sell totally is 30 month and under. Now it's nice that they're taking the over 30, because that makes those cull cows and stuff worth a little more, because some of that will be worth a little more money. So it's good overall, but it's not really a market mover. The market mover thing is going to be if we ever get China on board. That'll be a market mover.
Anything else you're looking as far as trade? Like, I know for me, the USMCA, that seems like a big deal, that's still hanging out there. What do you think?
Well, and hopefully Congress, we don't have to play politics then and drag our feet and not approve that when we get that done. And our president has to quit saying things and doing things to help put that off too. We need to get those deals done. Our exports are not good in comparison to last year. We need exports because we have such a large beef supply. The other thing that's out there is the swine flu. China has lost as many pigs as we have. That's hard for me to wrap my mind around. And that African swine flu, it's gonna get here, it's gonna get everywhere, and that's gonna have a real effect. There's gonna be a shortage of pork. Well, can't eat chicken all day, you're gonna have to come over here And that will long term, I think, be really good for our market. I don't know how soon, but that's just something you don't want to fall asleep on, because you get that Chinese deal done, they've lost pork is the #1 meat in the world, consumption-wise. So they lose that, they're gonna have to come somewhere. And I think that could be really exciting as we go forward. I just don't, that's not a short-term deal, that's a long-term thing.
Could you give us a sense about what the flood recovery has been like for you, some of the folks you've been talking to?
We've been really fortunate. We sit up on a big hill, so it hasn't had the effect on it on us that other people have. It's been devastating, and you know, I haven't been, you know, I stay here a lot, so I haven't been around a lot, but I think there's been some pretty considerable damage, and it's stuff that, you know, Mother Nature's not helping us recover from, because it just keeps coming more and more. So I think that's going to have a long-term effect on things, you know, including planting.
And Mike, any final advice for producers watching as our temperatures are warming up?
I really think we're close to a low for a time period here. I think we're going to see what we've seen the last few years, where we actually get a rally in June. I'm still really bothered about August, September period. There's a bunch of cattle got to go down. That's what I was really hoping for, like the Chinese deal and those things to get through. There's a lot of cattle in August and September, so we may not have our cash flow for the year yet, but I think we're going to see a little rally here going in through June. I think you have a chance to make some good marketing choices. I think the market looks good long term. Everybody's just got to be able to stay afloat till then.
Excellent insight, as always, from Mike. And we're going to continue our discussion on cattle and also get some updates into the hog market with our next guest. Dr. Lee Schulz is a livestock economist with Iowa State University, and he joins us now. So Lee, last week on the show, I was asking our market analyst how the new MFP payments would impact corn and soybean producers. Do you see that there's been a reaction from the cattle and pork markets with the MFP news?
Well, I think we're dealing with much different situation when you look at it specifically for pork. There has been no announcement for cattle, but the pork announcement was that, you know, it will be paid based on hog and pig inventory at a later specified date. But the difference when we look at crops versus the hog market is, you know, I think the announcement of this MFP payments has implications for delayed plantings and prevented potentially switching of crops, whereas the hog market, we're really running at full steam ahead because markets are rather strong right now, and so not going to see impacts on inventory with relation to this payment, as well as the payment is limited to $125,000 last time, and expectations are it would be similar for each entity this time of that $125,000.
And sticking with pork, trade disputes have already cost the industry about $2.5 billion over the past year, and now we have the news regarding tariffs to Mexico. There's still no USMCA that's signed. What are some of the ramifications for pork producers if this keeps up?
Well, I think it's really looking at the opportunity potentially lost on the trade front. When we look at that weekly trade data, exports of pork, when we both include the outstanding shipments, so sales that have been made but not delivered, as well as the actual exports delivered, we're up 22% increase year over year. And so we're seeing movement of that pork. Now, obviously, that's very heavily weighted by China, where we're seeing increases of those commitments as well as the export sales up over 1,000% year over year. But when you start to dig into the data a little bit further, you see that Mexico is down 21% compared to a year ago. Canada only up 2% compared to a year ago. So in aggregate, you're seeing some of those customary markets actually down significantly compared to what we had seen at this point last year. Also noting that Japan we've seen some weakness there over the first 6 months or so here as we look at the current pork market. But overall, they have been limited by the trade issues that we've had.
And Lee, of course, African swine fever is still a hot topic. Any new resources for us on that front?
Well, what I continue to refer producers to is the Secure Pork Supply Plan, and that has really three aims. It's biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance. And where producers really come into play there is biosecurity. And that plan recommends having a biosecurity manager, having a site-specific biosecurity plan, having a perimeter buffer area, and a line of separation. And the point of the Secure Pork Supply Plan is if we were to have an outbreak of African swine fever or any other tier 1 disease like classical swine fever or foot and mouth disease, that this would support continuity of business in the impact of those disease outbreaks. And also important when we look at biosecurity in the Secure Pork Supply Plan, that biosecurity also helps with endemic diseases. So it's something producers should and could be doing anyway to help keep their own inventories secure from disease.
So where do you see pork prices going as a result of this terrible situation in Asia?
Well, we've certainly seen tremendous volatility in prices over the last 8 weeks or so, where we've seen prices in April run up with summer contracts over $1 per hundredweight for hogs. We have seen that back off now here by about $10 per hundredweight or so, or even more on some of those contracts. And I think the issue there is, we haven't maybe seen as big of an impact as we thought from China, potentially, where we did see anywhere from 25 to 30% of the Chinese hog inventory is gone. Now, some of that died due to ASF, but some of that was moved to slaughter as a preventative measure. And also we need to remember that what really drives the demand for a good is, one, kind of tastes and preferences, and there is some fears in China that consumers have kind of stepped away from pork because of the concern of ASF, even though it has no impact on human health. Also, the prices of pork have increased, prices of substitutes have increased, and consumer incomes in China haven't changed, right? But overall, longer term, there's going to be a huge deficit in animal-based protein in China, Southeast Asia, and the United States will surely benefit from that in stronger exports here this year and likely into 2020 and potentially further.
So all that being said, and this can go for cattle or pork, any market trends or advice that you want to make sure we know about?
I'm going to kind of step to something a little bit completely different, but also very relevant to both the hog and cattle markets. When we look at the current feed supply situation, knowing that we brought several stocks or large stocks into production this year, but given the delayed plantings, the issues of prevented plant, we have seen markets really significantly rally here the last several weeks, and that has an impact on costs of production when we look at feed prices. Now, short term, we haven't seen a huge impact as local conditions have kept those basis levels pretty wide and cash prices are relatively low. But I think it's something producers need to keep an eye on because that's definitely impacting their cost of production. And the worse the situation continues to be, could have an impact longer term on not only costs this fall, but as we get into 2020.
Okay, Dr. Lee Schulz from Iowa State University. As always, appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Scott Brown from the University of Missouri. Time for trivia now, and this week we're testing your soybean knowledge. A 60-pound bushel of soybeans yields how many pounds of oil? Is the answer 5 pounds, 8 pounds, 11 pounds, or is it 15 pounds? Make your selection, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. Next, and in the wake of extensive flooding across eastern Nebraska this spring, many have drawn comparisons with the flood of 2011 along the Missouri River. However, as one grower puts it, quote, "The two floods are totally different," end quote. But there are some similarities, and in the June Nebraska Farmer, you can read about how the two floods compare in their impact on the state's agriculture, as well as differences in causal factors between the two events. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, this week brought a chance for rain each day. What's the forecast looking like for the week ahead?
You're exactly right, Troy. We did see the scattered thunderstorm activity, although a lot less in the later part of the week than we had during the first part of the week. Broad-based coverage so far this week since last Saturday. Anywhere from 1 to 3 inches in that corridor from Grand Island over to Omaha, about 45 miles north and south of there was the most concentrated area of precipitation this week, although we did have some isolated pockets in southeast, the Panhandle, southwest, and a little bit up into the northwestern part of the state. The biggest winners in terms of precipitation this week was the northeastern part of the state where we had much lower totals, and that's good news because this is the area that we've had more of the significant planting delays. So as we go forward in time, I think that what our main attention will be is whether or not this cool down next week will be as strong as been forecasted over the last 4 or 5 days. There's increasing signs that more of the cold air will push more to our east than it will come directly down into our region. So as we go to the upper air models today, what we are noticing, and here's a big trough, and this is the big spell of changing our weather, so to speak, as we go through the weekend. And it's going to start to move in our direction, this trough, bringing a cold front through the region. So for today, most of the state should stay fairly sunny. We do have low pressure systems stacking up to the south of us. This convection that we do show here Saturday, this is basically coming in after the nighttime hours as the cold front blows through, and then it will start to move through southeast Nebraska as we go through tomorrow morning as high pressure starts to push into our region, and most of the main activity will remain to our south and into the eastern Corn Belt. So you can see the last remnants of this thunderstorm activity. Most of this should clear out through the first half of the day, and then we'll be under a northwest flow aloft as we go into Monday. Much cooler temperatures. We'll be back down into the 70s, lower 70s, maybe upper 60s in the north as high pressure is firmly in control. The main activity is the low pressure systems to our east. Very heavy precipitation once again for the eastern Corn Belt and a little bit of moisture down into the Texas Panhandle. Then we see some intensification of that trough, bringing another shot of cooler air into our region, and another wave of energy will move into that northwest flow, potentially bringing thunderstorm activity once again during the overnight hours. Particularly the most significant area will be northeast and central Nebraska and southeastern South Dakota. Then that trough starts to lift a little bit toward our east-northeast on Wednesday. High pressure starts to push back in with a reinforcing shot of cooler Canadian air, and most of the precipitation once again will remain to our east. I think this might be a little bit overdone. If this is going to occur, it's going to occur during the overnight hours, but I really think the heaviest precipitation will east. And then we start to see that trough lifting up as we go on Thursday. We start to see energy moving out of the west. Low pressure starts to form in southwestern Kansas, brings us a fetch of moisture toward the north, and we start to see signs of thunderstorm activity developing, particularly during the overnight hours Thursday. More importantly, we start to see a piece of energy moving out into our region on Friday. Low pressure stacked up in Montana, Wyoming, and the Texas Panhandle. Big surge of moisture coming northward. Would expect to see widespread convection, particularly over the eastern half of the state, and we may be looking at some severe weather outbreaks, particularly in eastern Nebraska, with more precipitation to come as we go into the following week. So as we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast, it takes us to next Thursday through the following Tuesday. We are looking for below normal temperatures, but I think the core of it will be remain to our east as above normal temperatures start to slide into our region, and more importantly, precipitation looks to be above normal, and I think this is underplayed particularly for the Central Plains. So Troy, overall it looks like we're going to see some active weather next week, but it doesn't look to be as widespread as we've seen in the past, but cooler conditions and then very stormy as we go into next weekend.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how much oil can you get from a 60-pound bushel of soybeans? If you guessed answer C, 11 pounds, then you got it right. Nice job. Moving on, and it was a wrap for the 106th Nebraska Legislature last week. There were several bills that could have an effect on agriculture in the state too. Market Journal's Bill Dodd has been keeping his eye on what passed, what didn't, and what it means for producers in the state. Bill, what have you got for us today?
Thanks, Troy. This legislative session has been a bit of a roller coaster. Property tax was an issue at the top of the list many producers were hoping to have resolved this session. Currently, Nebraska ranks 7th in the nation for highest property tax rate, and many farmers and ranchers hoping to get a bit of relief in this area were sorely disappointed. LB 720, which is better known as the Imagine Nebraska Act, was structured as a corporate tax break for businesses that are creating new jobs. Now, the act passed its first 2 rounds of debate with significant support from proponents of LB 289, which confronted the issue of property tax and K-12 funding for the state. However, things took a turn for the worst when lawmakers couldn't reach a compromise in passing both bills. I recently talked with Fred Knapp, who covers the legislature for NET News, and he says there was a clear division between ag and business groups.
Well, they have different structural interests. You know, the rural interests want less property tax, and the city folks want less corporate taxes. And so They were at loggerheads, and since one didn't get their way, the other one couldn't get their way. So the corporate tax incentive bill advanced with the support of a number of people who supported the property tax bill. They, on the argument, oh, we need to advance them both. Well, then it came time for the property tax bill, which in its final form was going to tax a bunch of services like car repair and home repair, and there just wasn't the stomach for that. It didn't get the 33 votes needed for cloture. So the rural people then withdrew their support for final passage of the corporate tax incentive bill, and they, along with the urban progressives who didn't like that in the first place, were enough to stop it. So both measures died.
While the property tax bill failed in the legislature, an initiative has been filed to move this issue to the 2020 ballot. Meanwhile, Governor Ricketts has signed the new state budget, which will generate a reported $550 million in property tax relief over the coming years. And speaking of Governor Ricketts, in past years, he and the Nebraska State Patrol have been outwardly opposed to legalizing industrial hemp. However, recently, many state leaders, including the governor, began to come around to the possibility of opening the doors to this renewed industry. Now, among state leaders who backed the idea of hemp production was LB 657 sponsor, Senator Justin Wayne of Omaha. And he's been working tirelessly to pass this bill in coordination with the Department of Ag, the Nebraska State Patrol, and the governor's office. So why the change of heart for all these state officials? Well, one change at the federal level was enough to give many lawmakers pause for reflection.
The major thing that changed, of course, was that in the 2018 Farm Bill, they delisted hemp as a Schedule I drug, and defined it as containing less than 0.3% THC. So that kind of gives states the go-ahead to expand hemp production, but there was resistance in Nebraska. A few senators who voiced concern that this would be a slippery slope, and first you have hemp, and then you have medical marijuana, and then you have recreational marijuana. On the other hand, it's an alternative crop. It has a lot of support from major farm groups, and so there's an economic argument for promoting it and legalizing it.
An economic argument was indeed made by Senator Wayne and many supporting farm groups. Ultimately, this was not an opportunity an agricultural state like Nebraska could let pass through its fingers very easily.
So farmers are loving this idea. We had over 30 farmers show up to the committee hearing. We keep getting emails every day from new people who are wanting to grow, wanting to manufacture. We have testing facilities that are top of the line testing facilities for chemical testing, all types of testing that currently can't test these products because it's illegal. So this is going to open up a whole new market for the state of Nebraska. It's a whole new growth opportunity. You can grow seeds, you can grow the actual hemp for the stalks. There's CBD oils you can create out of it. This is a whole new market that is looking to grow to be over $1 billion in the next 2 years.
And while new laws were being enacted, one older law got a bit of a new look. The Right to Farm Act was first passed in the 1980s, and this basically gave established farmers grandfathered rights when it came to neighbors who wanted to file suit over some of the discomforts that could come with living next to some farming operations. Now, under the older version of the bill, any established farmer was exempt from legal actions from neighbors complaining of obnoxious noise, odors, or any other similar grievances. It basically argued if you're moving next to a farm or an agricultural institution, you should probably know what to expect. Now, however, the new look to this bill does give neighbors a bit of legal elbow room if their agricultural producing neighbor decides to change operation formats.
What has happened over the years is that case law has developed that says, well, but if you have a significant change in your farming operation, say you move from row crops to a hog confinement or a chicken barn, that you could still be sued. And so in its original form, this year's proposal would have said significant change doesn't count. If the farm was there before, you're immune. People objected to that. They said it would cut off rural residents who live next to farming operations that undergo significant changes. It would impair their ability to go to court. And so the final version that was passed says you have 2 years from when the nuisance arises to get to the courthouse and sue.
So while the new version of the bill does give neighbors of ag producers a bit of discretion as it pertains to such complaints, It simultaneously solidifies a producer's certainty if they do change operations and there are no complaints levied against them in a 2-year period, they would be free and clear from any complaint or suit brought against them. And Troy, that's what I've got my eye on this week. For now, I'll send it back to you.
Appreciate that breakdown, Bill. For our final story today, each growing season brings a new challenge to control the weeds in your fields. For the 7th year, weed specialists from the University of Nebraska will be hosting a weed management field day at the South Central Ag Lab in Clay Center. Dr. Amit Jhala is heading up the event and is excited for the topics being covered this year. One portion of the field day will focus on weed control for soybeans.
In soybean, we have a soybean variety that is resistant to glyphosate, glufosinate, and dicamba. It's known as extend flex soybean. It's not available commercially right now, but it will be available in the near future, and it will provide an opportunity to growers to use any of these 3 herbicides post-emergence. So it will be interesting to see this. In addition, we also have a soybean variety known as Elite 27 soybean, which is resistant to isoxaflutol, glyphosate, and glufosinate, all 3 herbicides.
Attendees will also see on-site demonstrations of herbicides to manage weeds in corn.
In last couple of years, we had a number of issues with how to control volunteer corn in corn. So this year we have a project to demonstrate how best you can control volunteer corn in enlist corn, which came to the market last year.
The field day is on Wednesday, June 26th, and begins at 8:30. Lunch and ice cream will be provided too. The event is free, but you'll need to register online. Nebraska Extension's Bob Klein will also be there to discuss what works and what doesn't in managing spray drift. All the info is right there on the screen and can be found on the Market Journal website too. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you've missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, with fewer farmers using fallow, what can you do instead? Hear what some researchers have found. And the USDA needs participation on a new project for gathering planted acres with precision ag. You'll hear about that and a whole lot more. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.